Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving straight into a historical moment that completely flips our standard expectations of ancient warfare totally upside down. According to our sources, the Conquest of Makkah was, well, exactly what it says right there, a remarkably rare triumph of mercy. So, instead of bogging down in the tactics of some bloody siege, we're going to explore an event that historians actually highlight as a masterclass in diplomacy, incredible restraint, and totally subverting the brutal norms of the era.
Okay, let's dive right into this. When you hear the word conquest, what immediately pops into your head? Go ahead, picture a typical ancient or medieval military campaign. Throughout history, and especially in the harsh, dog-eat-dog realities of 7th century warfare, an invading force almost always shows up looking for one thing: brutal revenge. The standard operating procedure for a victorious ancient army? We're talking widespread destruction, pillaging everything in sight, enslaving the locals, and violently asserting absolute dominance over the defeated. The ancient world was pretty much driven by a ruthless code of retribution and survival of the fittest.
But here's where things get super interesting. Our sources paint a starkly contrasting picture of what went down in this specific event. Unlike the standard invasions driven by, a thirst for retribution and tribal vengeance, the conquest of Makkah was fundamentally engineered to restore peace. Our material really emphasizes that this monumental campaign was centered entirely on peaceful reconciliation, not destruction. So instead of razing the city to the ground to punish the people for past grievances, the entire maneuver was carefully calculated to achieve a peaceful, totally bloodless transition of power.
Section 1. The March of 10,000. To really wrap our heads around the magnitude of this event, we have to understand the immense tension of the moment. The year is 630 CE, the sun is just starting to rise, and this massive Muslim army approaches the city of Makkah right at dawn. 10,000 men. Now, to put that into perspective, in 7th century Arabia, an army of that size appearing on your horizon usually spelled absolute doom. The Prophet Muhammad is leading this massive force toward a city whose leadership had actively persecuted him, exiled his followers, and literally waged war against him for over a decade. The historical backdrop here is just fraught with deep-seated animosity, which makes 10,000 armed men showing up a genuinely terrifying prospect for the city's inhabitants.
Section 2. Gates open to peace.
With all that incredible, heavy history of hostility just hanging in the air, what happens next defies all ancient military logic. In 630 CE, the army approaches the city limits, and rather than launching a brutal siege, the gates open. The sources detail how a highly strategic display of overwhelming numbers, combined with a strict, ironclad guarantee of safety for anyone who just stayed in their homes or laid down their arms, completely neutralized the threat of a battle. Realizing that fighting back was completely futile, most of the Maccan leadership just accepted the amnesty. This resulted in incredibly minimal physical resistance, leading to an immediate, basically instantaneous end to a conflict that had lasted for decades.
And that brings us to a really profound historical takeaway highlighted by our sources. Years of ongoing bitter conflict were resolved with remarkably little bloodshed. I mean, just think about the geopolitical rarity of that kind of outcome. You have this deep history of religious and tribal warfare, a massive army totally capable of exacting terrible vengeance, and yet the Maccan leaders, who had literally been sworn enemies just days prior, were met with a sweeping general amnesty. The military strategy was explicitly designed not to conquer through slaughter, but to secure the city while meticulously preserving human life.
Section 3. The posture of humility.
Now, let me pose this question to you. How did the prophet celebrate this monumental return? If we look at the leaders of other ancient empires, say the Roman or Persian generals from around the same era, a victory of this sheer magnitude meant a triumphant, heavily orchestrated military parade. You would totally expect golden chariots, captured enemies being paraded through the streets in chains, grand displays of superiority, and the public humiliation of defeated foes just to send a clear message of absolute power, right?
Well, actually, the historical reality was vastly different. The source accounts describe the Prophet Muhammad entering Makkah showing absolute humility. His head was lowered so deeply that his beard practically touched his saddle. Instead of celebrating the victory with pride or seeking revenge against the people who had fought him for years, he demonstrated profound restraint. This highly symbolic physical posture of humility completely defined the nature of his leadership during the entry. He definitely wasn't arriving as a conquering tyrant ready to gloat. No, this was Muhammad's journey through peaceful reconciliation, stepping in as a leader deeply committed to mercy and a smooth transition.
Section 4. Uniting the city.
From there, the sources outline some very specific, methodical steps taken to transform the city's spiritual and social landscape. Step 1. The idols surrounding the Kaaba were removed.
signaling a completely new theological era, but importantly, without harming the general public. Step 2, the city was peacefully reunited under a banner of broad forgiveness. And step 3, the worship of one God was firmly established. What historians find so remarkable here is the overall vibe of this transition. The people of Makkah gathered peacefully. It was a calm, structured societal shift that successfully dismantled the old political order without triggering any of the usual chaos, looting, or forced subjugation.
Section 5. A legacy of reconciliation.
The ultimate impact of these decisions is perfectly captured in this really powerful quote directly from our source material. The conquest of Makkah became, quote, a lasting example of forgiveness, humility, and reconciliation. The sources argue that this wasn't merely a clever tactical military maneuver. It was an enduring lesson in human morality that broke the endless, brutal cycle of Arabian tribal vengeance. By prioritizing amnesty over retribution, this historical event proved that true political and social stability can actually be forged through mercy rather than fear and destruction.
So our sources leave us with a deeply provocative standard to chew on. How can we apply this historical model of mercy to conflicts today? I mean, in a modern world that is still so frequently driven by retaliation and these endless cycles of revenge, what would it actually look like if modern conflict resolution was approached with the exact same humility, restraint, and dedication to peace that was demonstrated back in 630 CE? It's a fascinating historical paradigm shift to reflect on. Keep learning, keep questioning, and thanks so much for diving into this explainer with me.